In the heart of the night, at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Santa Fe, a celebration that was supposed to be memorable turns into a nightmare. Emily Johnson, wife of influential millionaire Oliver Johnson, begins to feel a strange discomfort after savoring the main course. The soft lights of the venue cannot hide the cold sweat trickling down her forehead, nor the restless gaze of Oliver, who seems more focused on the clock than on his wife's well-being. What starts as a simple malaise quickly transforms into a desperate race against time, as Emily, amidst luxury and sophistication, faces a life-and-death struggle that no one saw coming. And while the emergency doctors fight to save Emily, something darker seems to be happening behind the scenes, something that goes beyond a mere health issue. Beneath the veil of poison, the deadly truth behind perfect love. The night began with the soft glow of candles reflecting off fine crystal, creating an almost perfect, celebratory atmosphere. The restaurant, La Serafina, was Oliver and Emily Johnson's preferred destination for special moments. Located in an elegant corner of Santa Fe, the ambiance blended refinement and exclusivity. Emily smiled, enchanted by the thoughtfulness Oliver had shown in choosing every detail of that night, from the full-bodied wine to the grilled shrimp dish, one of her culinary passions. Oliver seemed relaxed, but there was an almost imperceptible tension in his movements. Emily noticed, but attributed it to the stress of business, something common in their hectic lives. She tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling settling in her stomach. Perhaps it was just the excitement of the moment. Perhaps it was the strong wine she wasn't used to drinking. Or maybe the shrimp. As the night went on, Oliver surveyed the environment with a calculating look, as if mentally checking each detail of the plan he had devised. He had always been a man of unrestrained ambitions, someone who did not accept failure. His marriage to Emily, initially based on affection, had become more of a power play for him. Control was everything to Oliver, and over time, Emily's fortune became an obsession. It was not just about the money, but about the feeling of absolute dominance, of being able to orchestrate every aspect of life around him. Emily, on the other hand, still saw in Oliver the man she married years ago, even though she felt something had changed. She was willing to fight for their marriage. But that night, she sensed that something more serious was at stake. The discomfort that began as a slight nausea soon turned into a deeper unease. Memories of the past began to surface, mingling with the reality of the present, as the discomfort in her stomach intensified. Suddenly, Emily's smile began to falter. A slight nausea overtook her, accompanied by a chill that ran down her spine. She placed her hand on her belly, trying to mask her concern. Oliver, ever observant, noticed. "Are you all right, dear?" he asked, his voice sounding a bit more anxious than usual. "Yes, just a bit of nausea. I think I ate too quickly," Emily replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But inside, something felt off. The following minutes brought a rapid escalation of symptoms. The slight discomfort soon gave way to a sharp pain in her abdomen and a feeling of weakness that made her arms tremble. Emily looked at the plate in front of her, now repulsive. The taste of the shrimp that once delighted her now seemed to have turned into poison. Oliver watched her every move with an attention that bordered on obsessive. He leaned forward, his restless hands on the table. "Emily, do you want me to call the doctor? Maybe it would be better for us to go home." No, I think it will pass." Emily tried to smile, but panic was starting to infiltrate her eyes. The words came out in gasps, and she felt her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. She brought her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race unevenly. Oliver's concern intensified, but internally, he felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. This was part of his plan, but he didn't expect it to be so hard to maintain his composure. When he signaled to the waiter with a quick gesture, his gaze never left Emily. "I insist, Emily. We are going home now." Emily barely heard Oliver's words. Suddenly, a wave of heat surged through her body, and she felt the world around her begin to spin. The restaurant, which had once seemed inviting, now felt suffocating. The air seemed to escape from her lungs, and before she could react, her body began to give way. "Emily!" Oliver's voice cut through the air, now filled with an urgency he could no longer disguise. He stood up abruptly, holding her by the shoulders as she slid out of her chair. "Waiter! Quick, call an ambulance!" The restaurant, which had been in reverent silence until then, plunged into controlled chaos. Oliver was trying to stay calm, but his desperation was evident. He grabbed the phone with trembling hands and began frantically dialing emergency services, trying to explain what was happening. Emily was conscious but could barely breathe. Each breath was a painful struggle, as if her body was shutting down, organ by organ. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. Everything around her seemed blurry, as if she were watching the scene through a thick fog. Time seemed to drag on as they waited for the ambulance. Oliver, usually so composed, now appeared on the verge of collapse. He held Emily's hand tightly, as if that could keep her conscious, but her gaze was starting to waver. Finally, the sirens drew closer. When the medical team entered the restaurant, they found Emily with almost no pulse, her face pale and her eyes half open. Oliver stepped back, allowing the paramedics to work, but the tension in his shoulders was evident. They quickly placed Emily on a stretcher and took her outside, with Oliver following closely, his face a mask of genuine concern, or perhaps something more. Inside the ambulance, Emily's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her body was convulsing slightly as the paramedics tried to stabilize her. Oliver sat beside her, gripping her hand, his gaze fixed on her. Adrenaline pulsed through his veins, but something in his expression was disturbingly calm, almost as if he were prepared for what would happen next. When they arrived at the hospital, Emily was taken immediately to the emergency room. Oliver paced outside, his hands trembling. He kept watching the entrance door with a dark intensity, as if something more was at stake that night. The medical team worked frantically to stabilize Emily, but her condition kept worsening. Every second felt like an eternity, and the tension in the air was palpable. But amidst the chaos, a figure emerged. Marta Anderson, one of the hospital's longest-serving staff members, noticed something strange about Emily's symptoms. Ignoring her superior's orders, she decided to intervene, administering an antidote she had access to only because of recent research. There was a moment of unbearable suspense as everyone waited to see if Marta's intervention would make a difference. And then, to everyone's surprise, Emily's condition began to stabilize. Her breathing, once irregular and weak, started to normalize slowly. Marta let out a sigh of relief, but she knew that the consequences of her decision were just beginning. Upon learning that Emily was stable, Oliver felt a complex mix of emotions. He should have been relieved, but there was something in him that felt disappointed, even if just for a brief second. He quickly composed himself, thanking the doctors with a gratitude that seemed a bit rehearsed. Meanwhile, Marta faced a torrent of criticism from her superiors for her unauthorized action. Despite having saved Emily, her decision was viewed as a serious act of insubordination. News of her impending dismissal began to circulate rapidly, but Marta was more concerned about something else. Something in Oliver's behavior unsettled her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with the whole situation. Marta couldn't sleep that night. The images from the emergency room, Oliver's strange gaze, and Emily's pale face haunted her mind. Something was wrong, and she couldn't ignore that feeling. Curiosity began to transform into an urgent need to understand what had really happened. The next morning, as she walked through the hospital corridors, Marta felt her colleagues' eyes on her. She knew that her decision from the night before had already spread, and the consequences would not be long in coming. The head nurse, a woman with a stern expression, called her for a private conversation. "Marta, we need to talk about your conduct last night," the head began bluntly. "You acted without authorization, put a patient's life at risk, and disobeyed direct orders. This is unacceptable." Marta kept her calm exterior, even though her heart was racing. "I did what was necessary. Emily was dying, and I knew the standard treatment wouldn't work. The issue here is not whether it worked or not," the head replied, her tone cold. "It's the fact that you acted on your own. This cannot be tolerated. Unfortunately, this means we are terminating your employment at the hospital." The words hit Marta hard. She had dedicated years of her life to that hospital, and now, for an action that saved a life, she was being fired. It was unfair, but she knew that arguing would be useless. Nodding silently, Marta handed over her badge and said goodbye to the place that had been her second home. But leaving the hospital didn't mean leaving behind the investigation that had already begun in her mind. In fact, without the responsibility of her job, Marta felt even more determined to uncover what had really happened to Emily. She knew she was getting into something dangerous, but the possibility of Oliver being involved in something nefarious couldn't be ignored. Marta decided to start where her intuition led her. She needed to better understand what could have caused Emily's sudden illness. The information she had about Emily's health, combined with her knowledge of toxins, pointed to possible poisoning. If this were true, Oliver could be directly involved. She began her investigation discreetly, asking colleagues who still worked at the hospital, looking for any signs of suspicious behavior. Most knew nothing, but a few mentioned how Oliver always seemed to be one step ahead, as if he knew exactly what was going to happen. This line of thought led Marta to consider a bold step: investigating Oliver's car. She knew it was an invasion of privacy, but the urgency of finding answers outweighed her moral reservations. Marta managed to uncover the Johnsons' home address, and one afternoon, when she knew Oliver would be at the hospital with Emily, she drove over there. The Johnsons' house was an imposing mansion surrounded by tall gates and security cameras. Marta parked her car on a nearby street, out of the camera's line of sight. She waited patiently, observing the activity. When she was sure no one was around, she approached Oliver's car, a luxurious black sedan parked in the garage. Marta's heart raced as she crouched next to the vehicle. Using a small flashlight, she began to inspect the interior of the car through the windows. It was hard to see anything, so she tried the passenger door. To her surprise, it was unlocked. Marta slid into the car, her movements quick and silent. Inside, the smell of expensive leather and scented cleaning products filled the air. She began to rummage through the glove compartment, side compartments, and under the seats. At first, she found nothing but papers and some common personal items. Just when she was about to give up, Marta noticed something strange in the trunk. There was a small case, apparently forgotten there. She pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside, she found vials with liquids and syringes, all labeled with chemical names that Marta recognized from her studies on toxins. Among the vials, one in particular caught her attention. It had the name of the same antidote she had used to save Emily. Marta felt a chill run down her spine. The evidence was clearer than she had imagined. Oliver not only had access to the poison that nearly killed his wife, but he also seemed prepared for every eventuality, including the need to reverse the effects of poisoning. With the case in hand, Marta stepped away from the car, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was now in dangerous territory. Oliver was not just a powerful businessman, he was also someone willing to do anything to achieve his goals. And now, Marta had in her hands the proof that could destroy him. As she drove back home, Marta pondered her next steps. Confronting Emily directly was an option, but how could she make her believe something so terrible about her own husband? Going directly to the police was risky. Without a solid explanation, they might not take her accusations against such an influential man seriously. Marta felt the pressure intensifying. She was alone, without support, and with a truth that could shake not only Emily's life, but also her own safety. However, one thing was certain. She couldn't turn back now. Now that she knew the danger Emily was in, it was her responsibility to act, even if it meant risking everything. With the case hidden in a safe place, Marta began to plot her plan. From now on, every move would need to be carefully calculated, as she was dealing with someone far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And while Emily remained in the hospital, unaware of the danger surrounding her, Marta knew that time was against her. That night, Marta went to the hospital once again. She knew it would be risky, but she needed to talk to Emily before it was too late. She entered Emily's room quietly, making sure Oliver wasn't around. To her surprise, Emily was awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "Emily," Marta began, her voice low but urgent. "We need to talk." Emily sat up slowly, the pain and weakness still evident in her movements. "I think so too, Marta. I feel like there's something I'm not understanding, something I'm not seeing." Marta took a deep breath. "Emily, I found evidence that Oliver may be involved in what happened to you. I know this is hard to hear, but I believe he may have tried to poison you." Emily was silent for a long moment, trying to process what Marta was saying. That's crazy, Marta. Why would Oliver do something like that?" "I don't know his motives, Emily, but everything points to him. I found a suitcase with bottles of poison and antidote in his car, and there's correspondence linking Oliver to a chemist who manufactures these poisons." Emily closed her eyes, trying to push away the confusion and pain that threatened to overwhelm her. But when she opened her eyes again, there was a determination there that Marta didn't expect. "We need to go to the police, Marta. He can't get away with this." Marta agreed, relieved to see that Emily believed her. But before they could plan their next steps, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Oliver was coming back. Marta quickly got up, signaling for Emily to stay calm. "I'm going to get out of here, but please, don't let him know that you know anything," Marta whispered. "I'll make sure the police get this evidence." Emily nodded, trying to keep a neutral expression as Marta quietly slipped out of the room. Moments later, Oliver entered, wearing a concerned expression. "Are you okay, my love?" "You look pale," he said, sitting down beside her. Emily smiled, even though the gesture was heavy with internal pain. "Just tired. I think I need more rest." Oliver watched her for a moment, his eyes analyzing every detail of her face. "Rest, darling. I'll be here, by your side." As Oliver stroked Emily's hair, she fought against the growing revulsion inside her. She knew she had to be strong, had to deceive him until Marta could expose the whole truth. But how long could she keep up this charade before Oliver noticed? Marta, on the other hand, left the hospital in a hurry that bordered on panic. She knew every second counted. With the evidence in hand, she headed to the police station. But before she could get there, she realized she was being followed. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car behind hers, always keeping the exact distance, but never disappearing. Marta's heart raced. It was clear that Oliver wasn't going to let her reach the police with that evidence. She needed to lose the car, needed to get to the station at all costs. She pressed hard on the accelerator, trying to increase the distance between the two cars, but the pursuer wouldn't give up. The city seemed like a web of streets and signals stretching out before her, but Marta knew time was running out. She needed to find a way to escape, needed to deliver that evidence before it was too late. Marta felt the cold sweat running down her neck as she tried to shake off the car that was following her. Every turn was taken with precision, every red light was ignored, but the vehicle behind her wouldn't relent. The tension in her body was almost unbearable. She knew she couldn't get caught. The evidence she carried was the only chance to save Emily from a possibly fatal fate and to expose the truth about Oliver. Spotting an intersection with the green light about to turn, Marta floored it, crossing the road at the last moment. The car that followed hesitated for a second before advancing, but that moment of indecision was enough for Marta to gain a small advantage. She kept driving, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, until she finally lost sight of her pursuer. With her heart still racing, Marta took a deep breath, trying to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She knew she didn't have much time before Oliver realized something was wrong. She needed to get to the police station as quickly as possible. After a few more tense minutes, Marta finally spotted the police station building ahead. She parked the car hurriedly and ran inside, the evidence carefully stowed in the bag she carried. Upon entering, she was greeted by a police officer who, noticing the distressed look on her face, led her directly to the on-duty detective. "I need to speak with the detective in charge. It's an emergency," Marta said, her voice trembling but firm. The detective, a middle-aged man with a tired yet attentive look, looked at Marta with curiosity. "What is it about, ma'am?" Marta began to explain, handing over the documents and evidence she had gathered. While speaking, she felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief for finally being in a safe place where the evidence could be analyzed and Oliver exposed. But the fear was still there, the uncertainty of how it all would end. The detective, who initially seemed skeptical, changed his expression as he examined what Marta had brought. He recognized the seriousness of the situation and the urgency to act. "Let's investigate this immediately," he said with a newfound determination in his voice. "If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Johnson could be in great danger." As the police began to mobilize, Marta couldn't shake the feeling that something could go wrong. She trusted that they had taken the right steps, but Oliver's threat was real and dangerous. If he knew that the evidence was in the hands of the police, he might try something desperate, and she was right to be afraid. In the hospital, Emily tried to remain calm while Oliver, still by her side, continued to play the role of devoted husband. But there was something about him that night, something that made her uneasy. He was quieter than usual, his eyes watching her every move with an intensity that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "You look so much better, Emily," Oliver said, his tone soft, almost comforting. But something in his words sounded false, as if he were hiding something. "Yes, I'm feeling a bit stronger," Emily replied, forcing a smile. But inside she was alert, waiting for any sign of danger. It was then that Oliver stood up from the chair beside the bed and began to walk around the room, as if he were pondering something. He approached the window, looking outside, but Emily noticed that his attention was on her. "There's something I need to tell you, Emily," he began, his voice laden with a strange blend of softness and tension. "About what happened that night at the restaurant." Emily's heart raced, but she maintained her outward calm. "What is it, Oliver?" "I've thought a lot about it, and I think you deserve to know the truth," he continued, turning to her, his hands gripping the back of a nearby chair. "Everything that happened, it was my fault." Emily froze. It was as if the air around her had become dense, hard to breathe. "Your fault? What do you mean?" Oliver approached the bed, his expression taking on a semblance of regret. "I didn't want this to happen, Emily. I truly didn't. But things got out of my control." "What are you talking about, Oliver?" Emily's voice trembled, but she needed to hear the words come out of his mouth. She needed him to confess. "I poisoned you, Emily," he finally said, the confession slipping from his lips like poison. "I planned it all to look like an allergic reaction, something no one would suspect. But you survived." Emily felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Why, Oliver? Why would you do this?" Oliver sighed, as if relieved to finally tell the truth. "I needed control, Emily. Control over everything, over your fortune, over our life. I thought that if you weren't here anymore, I could do that. But things didn't go as planned." Emily could hardly process the words. The man she had loved, trusted, had tried to kill her. And now, he was there, confessing it all as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You are a monster," she murmured, her voice heavy with pain and disbelief. "Maybe I am," Oliver replied, his voice now cold. "But I couldn't let you find out about all this. And if you hadn't started to suspect, it would have ended more easily. But now I need to resolve this another way." Emily sensed the impending danger. Oliver was determined to finish what he had started. She tried to move, but her body was still too weak for a quick escape. He moved closer, and the coldness in his eyes made it clear that he was prepared to do whatever it took. But before he could do anything, the door to the room was thrown open abruptly. 2 police officers entered with weapons drawn, followed by Marta and the detective. Oliver turned quickly, but it was too late. He was immediately surrounded and disarmed, his expression of surprise turning to pure hatred. "Oliver Johnson, you are under arrest for the poisoning of Emily Johnson and attempted murder," the detective declared as he handcuffed Oliver. Emily, still dazed, felt the weight of relief fall upon her shoulders. Marta rushed to her, holding her hand tightly. "It's all right now, Emily. You're safe." Oliver was taken away, his silent fury reflected in every step he took. But, as he was being taken out of the room, he turned to Emily one last time, his eyes gleaming with a veiled threat. "This isn't over, Emily," he murmured, before being dragged away by the police. After everything was over, Emily remained silent, trying to process all that had happened. Marta was by her side, offering the comfort and support she so desperately needed at that moment. "You saved my life, Marta," Emily said, her voice heavy with gratitude. "I can never thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me, Emily. I just did what was right," Marta replied with a gentle smile. "Now you need to focus on healing and starting anew." In the days that followed, Emily decided that she didn't want that experience to define her as a victim. She wanted to turn the pain into something positive, something that could help others going through situations of abuse and danger. That's how, along with Marta, she began to envision the NGO Safe Haven, a place where women in risky situations could find support, protection, and a chance to restart. The story of Emily and Marta became an example of strength and resilience, a testament that even in the darkest circumstances, there was the possibility of a new beginning. And as the two worked together to build something new, they knew that the past still loomed like a distant shadow, but they were determined to move forward, heads held high, ready to face any challenge the future might bring.